This bill is the revival of Jim Crow. We're not here because we have a problem with our elections. We are here because the Republican former president lost his re-election in November. And rather than admitting his defeat, he spun a web of lies, racialized lies, in an attempt to explain away his loss.
Florida is just the latest state where the legislature has passed a restrictive voting bill aimed at keeping you from voting. And Governor Ron DeSantis, Florida man, says he will sign it. Now, in light of regressive measures like this, President Biden stressed the need for federal legislation to protect voting access during his address to Congress. But even if the For the People Act were to pass, never underestimate just how far Republicans will go to win.
What are they going to do? H.R. 1 passes. What are you going to do then? You're going to take them to court?
We will absolutely sue. It's unconstitutional.
They almost look giddy. Joining me now is LaTosha Brown, co-founder of Black Voters Matter, and Fernand Amandi, MSNBC political analyst and host of the podcast Strange Days. LaTosha, I'm going to start with you because, look, I know you are exhausted because you've been on the ground for years, decades really, fighting this. And so now that we're seeing this, it's not just Florida, it's Texas, it's Arizona. I mean, there are over 360 bills across 47 states. I'm curious, what's our recourse? What does the work of Black Voters Matter look like as our very democracy is under attack at the state and local level?
You know, this is the moment that we have to dig in. We actually have to fight at a greater level. We have to really recognize that this is the moment, just like we saw in Georgia in 2018, the way we responded to it is we organized ourselves and came out more powerful and stronger. You know, the same thing happened in the 2020 election, in the runoff election, and even in our response to what's happening now. So I think that there are three approaches. One, I think we're going to have to organize and register people. We need more people engaged in the process, informed and educated. The second thing is that we've got to take this to the courts. Just as we're suing, we're planning on filing a lawsuit. And I think there are other organizations. We're going to have to take this fight to the community, to the courts, and to the coffers. You know, I think the third effort also is that for corporate accountability, that this is not an issue that we should allow the Republicans to make voting rights be partisan. This is a democratic right. This is about civil rights. This is about human rights. And so we're going to have to take the fight and really recognize we're going to have to fight for our democracy. It is not over just because we got rid of one person. We have to really hold this party accountable that in many ways actually empowered him.
Fernand, I want to bring you in here because, so LaTosha's saying they're going to go after the private sector, all the things. We have to make this a national campaign. But in Florida, they've held up this state as we were the gold standard for the elections. And at the same time, they're saying, oh, but there's all this fraud. So I'm curious from your perspective as a pollster, did we see an increase in mail-in voting because of the pandemic, or do you think this is the new norm? Because some of these rules they're trying to put in place will hurt their own GOP base, their own turnout.
Well, Tiffany, of course, we did see an increase in mail-in voting because of the pandemic, but that's also been the historical trend in Florida. As people are getting away from in-person election day voting because of the convenience offered by early voting and vote by mail, you see larger groups moving to the other alternatives, and many of those happen to be Democrats or independents who vote Democrat. But I think we really do need to come back, Tiffany, to the main question here, because shows like yours do a very good job of saying what is happening, but I don't think what is sufficient. I think we need to ask ourselves the question, why is this happening? This isn't a phenomenon that's just limited to Georgia and Florida. As we speak right now in Arizona, there is a Republican-led effort to recount and recertify votes that have already been certified by the federal process, which we all know what they're likely to come out and say. Lo and behold, Arizona's results are in question. And the reason you have to ask the question why is because why provokes action? Why are the Republicans doing this? The answer is a very disturbing one. It's because they are increasingly abandoning American democracy because they know they can no longer remain in political power if democracy is available and expanded to every voter and every citizen of this country. So you're going to continue to see these efforts over and over again, not just in Florida, not just in Georgia, not just in Arizona, but in every state across the country where Republicans control the legislature, where Republicans control the state government. And until we start asking why and start dealing with the why, this problem is going to get worse, and our democracy is greater and greater in jeopardy.
Yeah, I agree. And Fernand, you make a really good point. I just think some of us know the answer. Like, we know the why. And I think we have to keep saying that. So thanks for bringing up that point. Latasha, I'll bring you in and say something that disturbs me is when we say, oh, all this voter suppression is based on the big lie. Or this is because, you know, Trump was, spreading this lie about him winning democracy. And we know that's not true. This type of voter suppression has been happening well before Trump. So if that's the case, we're still fighting these same battles. The people at home watching right now, what can they do? What can we as a society do to bring this kind of voter suppression to a screeching halt?
You know, I want to give some context. So we have seen this kind of voter suppression happen before, and you're absolutely right. You know, what this last election did in 2020, it was catalytic. It opened up the big lie, actually was predicated on giving the excuse for them to actually do this now. But what we know is there has been an ongoing fight around democracy, but also with the demographic shifts that are happening in this country, the Republicans are seeking to dismantle what little elements of democracy exist. The good news is that we're actually winning, that part of what we're seeing as a response is because more people are participating in the process. The Republicans are actually losing ground, that ultimately we're seeing more representation in the House among women and communities of color. We're seeing it more in the administration. And so all of those things, what you're seeing is a backlash to it. I think what people have to really recognize is that the way that we actually support and protect democracy is we have to be engaged. And so we need people to actually vote. We need them to register their entire households. We need them to stay informed that we have a fight. This is an opportunity for us. We're at this road that we're on the road to peril or the road of possibilities and promise. And so in that, what is going to make America great is when Americans take charge and say that, no, electeds, you work for us. We don't work for you. This is our democracy, and we're going to hold people accountable that seek to try to destroy it or damage it or dismantle it. And we're going to be focused on strengthening it so that all people have access to free and fair access to the ballot.
All right, speaking of free and fair access, I want to play a clip from Senator Tim Scott and his completely asinine remarks that he made on the voting law in Georgia. Take a listen.
Republicans support making it easier to vote and harder to cheat. The state of Georgia passed a law that expands early voting, preserves no-excuse mail-in voting, and despite what the president claimed, did not reduce Election Day hours. If you actually read this law, it's mainstream. It will be easier to vote early in Georgia than in Democrat-run New York.
Fernand, I'm just at a loss. I mean, what do you make of those ridiculous comments?
Well, you can almost see the strings being pulled behind Senator Scott as he is articulating the very Orwellian talking points that he says, where black means white and up means down and left means right. I mean, it is obviously absurd on the face of it. And I don't even know why we continue to give any credence to the Republican Party on this subject matter when they've proven over and over again that their mission is to do the exact opposite. It's to make voting harder, and it's to make access to the vote much more difficult for everyday Americans, particularly if you are an American of color. You know, I want to come back to something that Latasha said earlier that I think is so important, and it's what can be done now. The idea that you have normally wait until a couple of months before the election, we can't do that anymore. We have to have almost a daily, weekly check-in. What is our voter status? That of my family and friends, the people in our social network. Because as they're going to continue to restrict voter rights, the only defense we have is to make sure that we have taken every step and every precaution now to make sure we still have the right and ability to vote.
That's right.
Yeah. And, you know, if Congresswoman Val Demings ends up on the ballot in Florida to challenge DeSantis, it'd be very interesting what they come up with down there. So we'll have to have you back to talk about that. Thank you, Latasha Brown and Fernand Amandi. And don't go anywhere.